Hi, my scholars. Welcome to week 25, Setting Healthy Boundaries. Today, we'll start off with reading our vision and mission. So our vision is to elevate people's growth mindset so we all achieve higher ambitions. And our mission is to guide first-gen high school students to the pursuit and obtain a college education. And just a quick refresher, our purpose for study groups are to increase our connections with other Y scholars, improve your student success skills, and ultimately guide you to practice your growth mindset. So again, we want to make sure we are working to really optimize those resources we have at our disposal, and again, optimize our life in return by practicing them and trying and adapting new strategies to again improve our overall success. So what we'll do today is just do a quick recap of last week's study group topic in regards to stress. So we discussed that stress really manifests itself in different ways, and they're both short-term and long-term effects. So some of those short-term effects we discussed included headache, chest pain, fatigue, muscle tension, anger, over or under eating, higher rate of risky behavior, etc. So again, these short-term effects are effects that we feel in that present moment. So again, they're hard to ignore because again, they're happening at that moment, at that instant. And again, it does really decrease our performance level and our ability to interact with others. And again, really feel good about our mental, physical, and emotional well-being. On the other hand, the long-term effects of stress include heart disease, diabetes, weakened immune system, anxiety, depression, and high blood pressure, etc. So again, these long-term effects are an invisible culprit. They are hard to determine that they're there, and once you do, it's typically too late to do much to kind of combat those, which is why we need to make sure that we are self-aware. To be self-aware again means that we're reflecting with ourselves and making that space to create change, to optimize our well-being, and try to prevent these effects from occurring. So the way in which we could prevent these effects from occurring is through coping strategies. So again, those are thoughts or actions someone uses to deal with a difficult situation. So again, it's our reaction to a certain stressor, problem, whatnot. And again, it helps us deal with it. It helps us really embrace what's going on and try to resolve. So some ways we can practice coping strategies include the form of breathing exercises. So again, breathing exercises are a quick way to really reset yourself, to refocus your mindset by taking a quick second to just breathe. So again, a strategy we can use is the 4-7-8 breathing technique so that again, we breathe more, stress less, and keep the pressure down. So again, just breathing, being conscious of our breaths and really taking that time and control over ourselves helps us again to alleviate stress and really prepares us to perform other coping strategies or just in general feel less pressure at that instant moment. Other coping strategies include maybe outreaching to other people in the form of kindness practices. So again, it's most effective to overcome anxiety by trying to shift the focus from yourself towards others. So again, try to realize that you're more than just your stressors. And again, you have that power and potential to influence other lives around you. So again, it helps us realize that we're a part of this larger society. And again, there's so much opportunity. So again, practicing these kindness acts go a long way, both for the person you're helping and for yourself. Today, what we'll talk about, in addition to coping with stress, another way to combat stress is to know your limits and set your limits. And these limits should be set with activities, people, work, etc. So this week, as mentioned before, is on how to set boundaries, specifically healthy boundaries. So today's session will be successful if we understand the benefits of setting boundaries with people, learn how to define and communicate boundaries, and learn how to affirm boundaries. So what's your understanding of boundaries and how do you set boundaries? Go ahead and take a quick 2 minutes to write down your understanding of what a boundary is and how do you usually try to set these boundaries? Or do you try to set boundaries? If not, what interferes with that? As you take a quick 2 minutes to listen and really reflect on your feelings, we're going to go ahead and play this video.
Solar panels. Get Tesla Solar and a Powerwall for no cost. Can you get...
On paper, boundary setting seems easy. Just say what you want and don't want. That's all there is, right? Well, boundaries tend to get much more complicated in the real world. Saying what we don't want isn't always easy, and following through on our own rules can feel like an impossible task. So how can we realistically set and stick to healthy boundaries? Well, we can start by knowing our wants, fears, and limits. This may sound simple, but how often do we really list out what we expect from a relationship? If you find yourself at a loss for what you need, think back on a past relationship and consider what made it feel safe and supportive, or what made it scary and dangerous. Looking at these patterns can clue you in on what you need and what your limits are, making it easier to express these boundaries to a partner. Communicating our boundaries is step 2 of this process. This one can be one of the scariest parts of a new relationship, but it's important to not let fear of judgment or conflict keep us from saying what we want or don't want. Be clear and direct about your needs, fears, and limits, and be as specific as you can. Whether it's calling every Sunday, kissing goodbye, or never sharing social media accounts, your boundaries are yours to express and enforce. Of course, those boundaries are meaningless if we don't enforce them. In any relationship, boundaries will be tested. Whether it's by mistake or intentional, point out when someone is crossing the boundaries you've put in place. Explain how it makes you feel when those rules are ignored. And if the other person is respecting your boundaries, express your appreciation. While boundaries are important, they may not be set in stone. Just as people grow and change, their boundaries will too. People may grow more or less comfortable with things as a relationship progresses, but remember, it is their choice to make. If someone is pressured into doing something outside their boundaries, their feelings and comfort aren't being taken into account. Healthy relationships shift and change, but respecting each other's boundaries should always be a given. For more content about healthy boundaries, visit guilfordhri.org or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. People with ADHD.
So some things we can take from that video is that one, in order to start this process of understanding your boundaries, you need to understand those wants, fears, and limits. So again, the first step is to really take the time to reflect on what your boundaries are and what is necessary for you to perform at your best and feel your best. The second step is to communicate these boundaries. So you need to communicate these with those around you and with yourself in order to really ensure that you understand those guidelines you have. Again, while we can communicate these, the best way to make sure that our boundaries are respected is to, again, enforce them. So really trying to stand up for yourself and safeguard your space, your limits, your boundaries. And lastly, one thing we should always keep in mind is that our boundaries are, again, flexible. They're able to be changed considering that we live different experiences every day, and every experience we have, every interaction we go through, again, has the potential to really influence those boundaries we set for ourselves. So again, boundaries are those limits and guidelines we have for ourselves in order to ensure that we feel our best, do our best, and are able to be our best. And to set those boundaries, we need to make the time to, one, reflect on our wants, limits, and fears, learn to communicate those with others, enforce them, and lastly, be well aware that boundaries can change. So again, boundaries give us a sense of agency over our physical space, body, and feelings. Again, we all have our limits, and boundaries communicate that line. So again, we have this sense of agency over our physical space, body, and feelings. And by really trying to communicate those boundaries are how we, again, make our limits known to others and to ourselves. We can set boundaries for different variety of subjects, including personal space, emotions and thoughts, stuff or possessions, time and energy, cultural, religion, and ethics. So again, boundaries are in every aspect of our life, and it's up to us to really establish those and learn to differentiate when a boundary is specific to time versus maybe personal space and whatnot. So to really understand the nuts and bolts of boundaries, we need to understand those kind of benefits to boundaries. So boundaries can improve our relationships and self-esteem. They can be flexible and can be shaped throughout our lives because again, every experience we have in some way has an impression on ourselves and our values and beliefs. And our values and beliefs are what determine our boundaries and limits for ourselves. Boundaries can also allow us to conserve our emotional energy. So again, when we have that safe space, we don't need to, again, really go through those rough patches and kind of put excess strain on ourselves because again, our space is not being respected. Boundaries can also give us a space to grow and be vulnerable. So again, when we are communicating these boundaries, we're showing a vulnerable side to ourselves, and that vulnerability is only going to work to our benefit in that the other person or yourself can see and really understand why those limits are important to you. And again, vulnerability and oversharing are different. So shared vulnerability really aims to bring people close together. On the other hand, oversharing can use drama to manipulate or hold another person emotionally hostage or force the relationship in one direction. So again, when you could kind of identify oversharing by identifying those red flags. So maybe posting personal rants and attacks on social media, being dominated or having those one-sided conversations, sharing personal details with new people in hopes of hurrying the friendship along. So again, this is oversharing, and this is something we kind of want to deviate from and instead work to, again, practice more vulnerability instead of oversharing. So again, the benefits to boundaries are that you have better self-esteem, you conserve emotional energy, and you have more independence and agency. Moving forward, where to draw the line. So again, your boundaries are a personal choice and they really work to speak about your own needs. So again, when you want to define and you know when to draw that line, it's important to again determine those rights you have. So again, you want to ask, what are your rights? Examples can be, I have the right to say no without feeling guilty. I have a right to be treated with respect. I have a right to make my needs as important as others. I have a right to be accepting of my mistakes and failures, and I have a right not to meet others' unreasonable expectations of me. See, so when we understand our rights, then we can go about creating those boundaries because we know what we deserve. Another way to really draw the line and establish those boundaries can be in the form of following your gut. So again, we all have that intuition when maybe a certain event isn't going too well. And that's when we know we need to put our foot down and again, draw that line. Really try to communicate those boundaries. Another way again to draw the line is to take the time to reflect. What are your values and what do those values tell you about the limits that you have for yourself or expectations that you have? So again, your boundaries also relate to your moral philosophy. Again, it's important that you try to identify 10 important values at least, then narrow that list to 5 or even 3. And again, it's important to realize that boundaries are flexible. Our boundaries are shaped by our heritage or culture, the region we live in, whether we're introverted, extroverted, our life experiences, our family dynamics. So again, our boundaries are very specific to those lived experiences we have. And again, they're going to vary between every individual, which is why it's important that we communicate these. Because again, my boundaries may not be the same as yours. And in order to ensure that there's respect all around, we both and we all should make the effort to really try to communicate those boundaries and enforce them with our daily actions. So in order to create those boundaries, we need to be assertive. We need to take responsibility over ourselves and really try to, again, promote that self-agency. We also need to learn to say no, to protect our space and safeguard it. And we could also look to get support when we're creating our boundaries. So again, you can say no without an explanation and without having to provide any emotional labor to a person you're saying it to. And you can also set boundaries for your staff, physical and emotional spaces, and your time and energy without necessarily announcing it too. So again, defining and asserting your boundaries can get trickier if a loved one lives with, again, mental illness, depression, anxiety, or a history of trauma. So this is why you should always try to look for support when you're trying to create these boundaries. And if you're experiencing challenges with setting or asserting boundaries, or if someone is causing you difficulty by crossing them, never hesitate to reach out to a mental health professional. So again, going back to that intuition we all have, boundaries can clue us into behavior that might be harmful. So again, when we have those clear boundaries for ourselves and we know that they're broken, that means that maybe something that we don't like is expected to occur or may be more likely to occur. So again, when our boundaries are broken, it gives us to really realize that what's ahead of us may not be beneficial or very safe for us. So in order to make sure that um, we are really optimizing how we communicate our boundaries, it's important that we're using I statements and feeling statements. So by using I statements, you're taking on responsibility for how you feel, think, and need. So again, these are most accurate because you're describing yourself. You're not trying to interpret other people's feelings, but instead you're making it clear what you are feeling. And you have, again, the ability to give the appropriate description of how you feel, think, and need, which is why you want to utilize I statements. And I statements consist of 3 parts. I feel blank when blank because blank. So again, you want to list a specific emotion. Then you want to go ahead and explain when it is you feel that emotion. And then you want to correlate the two. So why do you feel this way? So again, the I feel is that inside feeling, that emotion. And then when I/you is that person's actions or behavior that influenced your feeling. So again, we want to make sure we're using feeling statements and not non-feeling statements. So in this list here, there are a few examples of both feeling or non-feeling statements. So an example of a feeling statement is, I feel anxious about talking to this teacher, versus a non-feeling statement, which would be, I feel she hates me. So again, that non-feeling statement lacks in putting an exact emotion to it. And besides that, it's trying to interpret how the other person feels. So it's not that, again, you have an emotion that you can clearly determine, but instead you're inferring someone else's emotion. So we want to avoid those non-feeling statements and instead try to use those feeling statements, like the example, I feel anxious. So it's I, again, you're talking about yourself and you're explaining that exact feeling, anxious. And then why? So why do you feel anxious? Because I'm talking to this teacher. So again, a feeling statement is appropriate in really making clear what you feel, and because you're describing yourself, your feelings, thoughts, and needs, it's most accurate. So again, it's great to identify your feeling, the reason, and the need not being met. So once you identify that I statement, the next that should follow is a request. So again, give a progressive conversation by implementing a request, by again giving a resolution to that feeling. So again, next is to identify your request clearly to yourself or to the other person. So the I statement should be followed by a request. What I would like is blank. So a quick example would be this scenario here. My sister continues to come into my room as I am trying to complete my homework assignment that is due in 30 minutes. So an example of an I statement plus request can take the form of, I feel distracted and unfocused when you come into my room repetitively because I lose my train of thought once the door swings open. What I like is for you to give me space for 30 minutes while I finish my homework. So again, that emotion is distracted and unfocused. The win is the act of your sister coming in repetitively, and because of that repetitiveness, you're distracted because you lose your train of thought with the sound of the door. So that request then that follows is that you want your personal space specifically for 30 minutes. So again, when you're practicing the I statement and request, you want to be as specific as possible to make sure your boundary is firm and clearly communicated. You want to make sure that it's not ambiguous. So what I'd like for you to do now is in your YSP journal, go ahead and practice an I statement followed by a request. So you're going to use the I statement plus request for the following two examples. The first example is, for the past 2 months, I have not met the deadlines of any of my assignments. The second example is, I have a group project with 3 other people. A week before the assignment is due, one of my colleagues hasn't submitted any work. The project is worth 60% of my final grade. So what you're going to do is, in your YSP journal, you're going to go ahead and practice writing an I statement plus a request for each example. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.